last Saturday's demonstration was a very, very, very powerful and important moment, and next Saturday should be equally so. Those who prominently praise the mantra of a rules-based international order, who invoke international law only in certain circumstances, and who have stood shoulder to shoulder with the Prime Minister of the most right-wing and fanatical Israeli government in history, have shown their true faces. Sunak and the so-called leaders of the so-called opposition have given a green light for Israel to do whatever it wants in Gaza and to the Palestinian people more widely. As such, they carry responsibility for the carnage already carried out and the plans for further such carnage. Let's be clear about what's happening here. A nuclear-armed state, Israel, which has ignored or broken United Nations declaration after United Nations declaration, which refuses to sign up to the most rudimentary of UN treaties on nuclear weapons, which has dispossessed, occupied, and tormented the Palestinian people for decade after decade, is now, as we speak, openly carrying out acts of collective punishment against the Palestinian people. And it is planning further such punishments and worse. Where does this leave order, the rules-based order, rules, laws, and the other words that trip off the tongues of human rights lawyers turned politicians?
Yeah, I can't switch this off though.
It leaves them in the dust.
You want that got rid of?
There's some. Can everybody mute? Because I'm losing my thread a bit. So what can we do? And that's the important aspect of tonight's meeting. What can we do? As in the past, we should follow the lead of those who are at the sharp end of oppression and exploitation. So let us follow the lead of the Palestinian trade unionists, who have made an urgent call to end complicity and to stop arming Israel. Their call states, we need to take immediate action wherever you are in the world to prevent the arming of Israel and the companies involved in the infrastructure of the blockade. We take inspiration from previous mobilizations of trade unions against the invasion of Ethiopia in the 1930s, the fascist dictatorship in Chile in the 1970s, and elsewhere where global solidarity limited the extent of colonial brutality. Now, I attended a meeting earlier today called by Unite activists, where we heard these calls reiterated by Palestinians on the ground. Their message must spread, plans must be made, organisation must get underway. And it can happen here again. It can happen here. Because we know that similar actions in the past have happened here. We remember when Rolls-Royce workers in East Kilbride, defied the Pinochet dictatorship and their bosses in 1974. These workers put their tools down and refused to repair jet engines destined for the Chilean regime. Who of you here remembers when in 1962, some of you may have been around there, who knows, but in 1962 in the Northwest, over 700 workers from Carrington's Petrochemicals in Cheshire put down their tools in opposition to the resumption of nuclear testing. Who remembers when in that same week, workers from Henderson's Ford, Crosby Bath's building site, Eric Bemrose printers, automatic telephones, ICI in Runcorn, and British rail workers in the Northwest put down their tools alongside these petrochemical workers and marched with them? If it could happen in the Northwest in 1962, an event that was inspired by Pat Arrowsmith, C&D Vice President, who died recently, if it could happen in East Kilbride in 1974, when industrial workers took a stand against fascism, then it can happen now. across the country in 2023 in support of the people of Palestine. So let's raise this call wherever we can. Let's assist and organise wherever we can. Let's help to stop Israel's war machine. This is something we can do. But what else can we do? We must continue to protest. We must help to make sure that this Saturday's national demonstration is as big as possible.
Tom, can I stop you just for a second? I'm trying to stop the noise that's interrupting everybody. If I'll mute all and then ask you to come back in. Is that okay?
That's fine. Yeah. Am I back? I'll start. What else can we do? We must continue to protest. We must help to make sure that next Saturday's demonstration is as big as possible. Last Saturday was the biggest ever national demonstration in the UK in solidarity with the Palestinians. This Saturday must be even bigger. Making this happen is important because in London we will stand side by side with the big Palestinian population in our capital city, but we'll also be standing side by side with Palestinians and their supporters across the world. They will see our act of solidarity. It will be important. And this demonstration is also important because our friends and comrades in France and Germany have been told that they cannot show their solidarity. What a disgraceful and sickening move. And if a so-called centrist French president can ban protests, if a so-called social democratic chancellor of Germany can ban protests, then be sure of this. This right-wing Tory government here will try to do the same if they can get away with it. The only way we can stop them is to make sure that there are very, very many tens and hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of London this weekend. And if it does come to it, that we're prepared to defy their bans. Just like the people in France and Germany who have already defied the bans on solidarity. The demonstration in London on Saturday will encourage very many more to do the same across Europe. So I'll finish with these three simple pronouncements. Freedom for Palestine, and we know what that means. Long live Gaza, because they are under a brutal attack. And we must stop this Israeli war machine. And we must know, we must understand, we must tell everybody who will listen and organize everybody who will listen that solidarity action can win. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much for doing that. Our next speaker is Hamza. I think you're here, Hamza. Can you say hello?
Yeah. Pleasure to be here.
Hamza's a British Palestinian writer and researcher, and very active on Twitter at the moment on the issue, and had some good interventions even on Sky. So Hamza, please.
Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be here. I think that actually this in and of itself answers the question of what we can do, because this type of solidarity, this type of collective organization, and this type of diligent these meetings, these conversations are vital. Today, I'm in a state of play today. Hospitals are completely out of service, many on the brink of collapse, supermarkets are running out of food. Lots of water.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, there's a water crisis which is giving birth to lots of waterborne diseases, and that's before we even begin mentioning the death toll, which is stubbornly high. Children, more than 2,000, and so it's vital that we begin asking the question of what we can do, because everybody. I was just on a call just before I came here, and everybody from within Gaza, from within the West Bank, everybody is reiterating that we need to be the voice of the voiceless. We need to be their voice. They are without electricity, without fuel. They're being bombarded relentlessly. They're being dehumanized by our media, and we need to be their voices. Two particular realms have been have been really in this country in particular have shown a real abdication of responsibility, a dereliction of duty, and those are the political class and the media class. And we've got the kind of a cross-party consensus at the minute, which is, you know, in full-throated support of this genocide. And I think it's particularly damning when the Labour Party comes out with the type of sentiments that it has from its shadow front bench, the likes of, you know, high-profile figures. The future Foreign Secretary looks like, for example, David Lammy, you know, equivocating when asked about international law. The same of Lisa Nandy just on Sunday. Keir Starmer still hasn't apologized for his statement. Instead, is trying to, you know, rewrite history when that clip is still online when he said Israel has the right to impose a siege, impose collective punishment on Gaza, which is obviously a war crime. But it's actually, and obviously the media as well, we've seen, you know, CNN and BBC in particular, supposed to be, you know, real linchpins and beacons of neutrality in the media, and these major broadcasters, broadcasting giants. And again, they've been forced into apologies. They've been, you know, they've misrepresented, mischaracterized. They've given a platform to, you know, Israeli ambassador has been on numerous times unchallenged to, you know, her history in and of itself is questionable. She's been, you know, even within Israel, they call her, you know, a fascist openly. And these are the people that are being platformed and be given an opportunity to further dehumanize and reduce the Palestinian struggle to one of terrorism, which is fundamentally absurd. But actually, it crystallizes why we need to challenge these channels, and within the political class, this is why we need the activism, the organizing at the local level. As was mentioned before, you know, the 300,000 to march in London, everybody saw how the weather was as well, and there were numerous protests in Manchester, in Glasgow, all around the UK. So people power is important, and whilst the media like to suggest at the moment that there is a war going on in Gaza, it's a genocide, but there is a war in the digital realm, and it's a misinformation war, and that's one where we need to counter it. And it's, you know, the likes of social media has been strong in, you know, challenging and contesting those dominant narratives which have surfaced, which have, you know, dehumanized Palestinians and kind of shown us to be, you know, we're all terrorists, and we all, you know, Hamas's attacks were akin to terrorism, and as a result, all the Palestinian people are terrorists, and, you know, Hamas and the Palestinians are one. When actually, within Gaza, just before October the 7th, before if we're using that flashpoint, Hamas doesn't necessarily enjoy a majority support within the Palestinians anyway. We are not one homogenous bloc. We have different views and different ideals, but we all believe in our self-determination, our freedom, our liberty. But what we're seeing around the world, from Europe to the Middle East to North Africa, is people power. We're seeing diligent collective organizing. We're seeing the solidarity, the unconditional solidarity, and we need to channel those emotions and that strength that we do have. Because I've seen a lot of people talk about, you know, they're being desensitized, or perhaps they're saying, okay, they're being worn down by this. And you have to remember, everything that we might feel is being felt tenfold, if not times 1,000 in the Gaza. And it's up to us to use the mechanisms that we do have. And I'll just list a few. For example, the media. It's up to us to hold the media to task. It's up to us to force those U-turns, to force those apologies. It's up to us to raise our voices. It's up to us to be able to share those views, and to get, when people do challenge those narratives, to amplify and share those. We have new media outlets where we're actually fortunate in Britain. We've got several unapologetic editors of newspapers, different new media outlets on the left who have been unapologetic and unconditional in their solidarity. Let's amplify those articles. That article everyone's been putting off reading, share that, send it to your family, bring everybody on board, attend those local events, do the door knocking, mention Palestine in those door knocking campaigns. Diligently organize and resist. Like I said, this is a prime example and a very compelling example of what the type of things we can do. Everybody will leave here with a different idea. Everybody will leave this meeting with a different view, and have hopefully a greater determination to spread the message. And the last point, which I will end with, which I always feel is really important, is BDS. And there's been a lot of, if you go on BDS's Twitter page and their website, there's been a lot that's been you know, they've circulated and disseminated since the start of this genocide, as I say, in Gaza. And it's time for us to collectively hold Israel to account, like the previous speaker said. We've had campaigns, you know, to stop the arming of Israel, organizations and corporations that are complicit in the genocide. Already those that have spoken out, for example, we've seen Starbucks, we've seen McDonald's, who have actively been complicit, and we need coordinated campaigns. not just, you know, on an individual basis that, you know, I'm going to not buy my, you know, pumpkin spice latte or whatever it might be, but everybody needs to tap into those pieces. And I would urge everyone to go onto BDS's page after this, check out their Twitter and join into those coordinated campaigns, whether it's applying pressure to Barclays, whether it's McDonald's, whether it's Burger King, whether it's AXA. There are numerous organizations, numerous corporations. PrEP, for example, continues to operate in occupied territories. Those type of campaigns, that's where we can use our voice, that's where we can spread the message. And obviously, I recognize that within Britain now we're operating in a culture of increased repression, the clampdown on protests, the clampdown on BDS specifically. But Andrew, who will speak later, can testify to the importance of BDS and boycotts to counter this level of oppression, this level of apartheid, this level of subjugation. And as I say, the main point I would leave is to check out BDS, check out what they're doing. But also, I've spoken to a lot of people in Gaza, I've spoken to a lot of Palestinians, my family in the West Bank, and they've said we need to, you know, they said it's vital that we continue to fight this fight. They don't have the mechanisms, the avenues that we have. And it's up to us to channel that frustration, that anger, that hope into those avenues, like I said, and, you know, like I said, share those articles, amplify those voices, collectively organize, diligently organize, and collective action, our collective strength. We need to be the voice of the voiceless, and that's how we can be the greatest ally to the Palestinians.
I'm muted, having muted everybody. So thank you very much. And interesting that we move on to the issue of the boycotts and the apartheid, given that we've got two speakers here from South Africa, and they weren't particularly invited as being from South Africa, but the link is organic. And yet I do sort of say, Helen's put in the chat that there've been 3 large protests in Liverpool as well, and another one due for Sunday. So thank you. And our next speaker is Audrey White from Stop the War in Merseyside. Audrey.
Thanks for inviting us to speak, Val. I mean, you know, we really need to have a look at, you know, why we are where we are, and why we have we have to fight to have our voices heard. And first thing I want to say is that we have to realise that what happened on October the 7th, you know, history didn't begin on October the 7th, that October the 7th, 2023 is a direct result of what happened in 1948. And this is where we have to come from. And it suits the establishment, it suits the media, it suits Labour politicians, you know, to start from October the 7th. And of course, it's so dishonest. You know, I was a founder member of the Merseyside Stop the War Coalition. And, you know, when I look back on those years of many years ago now of opposing, you know, it wasn't just Stop the War, it was against occupation. And we always had a speaker from Palestine. And the work that we did then, you know, Liverpool used to say then that we weren't radical enough, that we had to really be more forceful, more radical, and engage in civil disobedience. And we were opposed because, you know, we wanted to bring people with us, keep everybody on board. And of course, it succeeded in the biggest demonstration, you know, in history. 2 million, well, it was a worldwide demonstration. 2 million people were on the streets of London. And, you know, our argument was there are different layers. It's very relevant today. There are different layers of people prepared to be, prepared to protest, but at different levels, you know, and there was people like us, and I'm sure, you know, 1/4 or 1/10 of those 2 million people would have been prepared to engage in peaceful civil disobedience, you know, rather like what Elbit's doing now, like people in Elbit, campaigning Palestinian action, Palestinian action campaigning against Elbit, the manufacturers of the weapons that are used to kill Palestinians. So there's a lot we have to learn about why we failed, you know, we do keep people on board, and it is only through mass organisation that we will eventually stop, because we have to stop these people, because we are really on the verge. You know, the days, each day goes by, the whole of the world is in conflict, and we do have a threat of a third world war, or a world war, nuclear war, you know, as Tom was saying earlier on. So we really do have to bear in mind that we have to work harder. We have to unite like we've never ever united before. You know, that's why I'm also part of the For the Many network. We do have to join together as individuals and as organisations and be more and more committed like we've never been in our lives. Because, you know, we all say, oh, the ruling class in this country is stupid. They're not stupid. They act stupid. They're the most backward elements, I think, of the ruling class in the world. One of the most backward elements, but they are not stupid. And they know how to silence the voice of people like ourselves, who are, as we know, the majority, absolutely no question. People in their hearts are anti-war and anti-occupation. Absolutely. It's a simple ABC argument. You can muddy the waters with what you like, but people basically are anti-war and anti-occupation. And we have to realise why the leaders in the Labour Party, the establishment, spent so much time and effort and resorted to every lie they could think of to neutralise the Labour Party, to empty it of every socialist, of every pro-Palestinian, of every pro-peace member there was in that party. And that was why we've all got to speak openly and very clearly and expose that's what the anti-Semitism, the false anti-Semitism campaign was all about. And unless we do that, we'll complicate our own history, our own recent history, which has been very confusing for working class people, for people who aren't involved in politics, who are just looking on the sidelines and listening to the propaganda from the press and from our Labour Party leaders. We have to be very clear that we don't just learn from the history, you know, since 1948, that we also look at what happened in the Labour Party to silence the voices that were growing louder and louder and louder. And that's what the anti-Semitism, false anti-Semitism scam was all about. And the other thing I think we've got to realise that we needn't be shocked about Keir Starmer condoning war crimes, because, you know, he's not the first. He's not the first war criminal to lead the Labour Party. Tony Blair, you know, Jack Straw, Brown, and all the rest of them. You know, they lied to get to bomb the hell out of, shock and awe, against the Iraqi people and Afghanistan, of course. So don't be surprised at the role of these people or the depths these people are prepared to go to shift opinion away from being sympathetic or supporting or fighting and being militant against what Israel is doing. That is the role. That is the role of the leadership of the Labour Party, has been for many decades. And so let's not be shocked. As socialists, let's not be shocked, but let's approach people with the arguments, you know, that we've learned from our own past. So, you know, if you think about what Tony Blair, this is the idea today. Tony Blair, I remember him saying in the build-up to war to Iraq, we throw the cards in the air, throw the playing cards in the air and see where they land. And that's their mentality. Absolute chaos. Absolute chaos while they do what they want to do and try to divide us in any way and by any means they can. And we have to all remember that the same people who are pursuing all-out war all the time in Ukraine, against the Palestinian people, wherever, they're the same people who are pro-austerity. They're the same people who are pro-privatisation. They're the people, you know, who want to deny us our right to demonstrate, our right to strike, our right to protest, our right to have a voice. So we've got a massive, massive job on our hands. And I think we've got to now organise ourselves. We've got to make our institutions fight for us. We've got to make our trades councils take the lead in organising these demonstrations. We organised, we had a resolution at our trades council last Thursday and on Palestine. And, you know, we are trying to push them. We wanted them to set a date, actually. We wanted them to take a lead on it. They've agreed that there was an amendment to get it through to say that they would, you know, join in organising. But unless we hold these, our own organisations, our own unions, our own trades councils, our own whatever, we have to fight within our own organisations to make them represent us. And if they don't, you put yourself forward and you become part, a delegate, or take a position on these bodies and make them fight. Because as Tom said, it's happened. Any change has only happened from below. And as Tom said, we have had major victories over years. When workers are so determined, so repulsed by what's happening, they make a stand. And they do it when there's a mass movement. They don't do it on their own in a little corner somewhere. They do it when it's a voice of mass numbers of people. So we have to fight for justice, and we have to fight for peace and a better world. And I think the level of commitment now has to go up a place. We have to, some people will be involved in civil disobedience, and that's brilliant. Some people won't take that risk, but will work hard at resolutions of forcing organisations to do what they're supposed to do, represent the majority of us. And that's the job of work we've got to do. And I'm going to finish on that because I think at BDS, absolutely 100%, you know, these are the organisations, these are the ways we do defeat. We've seen it historically. We know it can be done. And I think the world is repulsed. You can see it right, even in America, even in Austin, Texas, there was big, massive demonstration in support of Palestine. So
Audrey, can I ask you to
I'm finishing right now. There is a confidence in our people now, and I think we've got nothing else to do but fight back. And I hope from this meeting we can organise a public meeting from this meeting. That's my last word on it. So thanks very much for listening to me. Sorry I went on too long.
We're keeping nicely to time, thank you. Before I bring Haneen in, just a story I had from a student, a school student in a very strict school, that as they were walking up the stairs at the start of the day, going into lessons, suddenly a shower of tiny, tiny Palestine flags came flittering down to land on everybody. So if the kids can be as imaginative as that, I think that we can learn a bit from them. And can we now go to Haneen, please, from the hotel room? We're so pleased you came to join us. Thank you.
Hiya. Just apologies if you hear loads of kids in the background. They're all going a bit wild. But yeah, just really excellent point coming from everyone, especially on the point that Hamza built on people power, and you know, fighting the fight, you know, against Zionism as well. That's a really important point. At the moment, right now, the momentum is bigger than ever, with protests reaching a record in London. I was actually in the London one on Saturday. First time I've ever been to one. Usually I'm always in the Liverpool ones. Audrey was such a shock, you know. I didn't imagine it to be so big. But on the back of that, I've never seen the Palestinian cause be talked about so much. The time I've seen it talked about a lot was when the incident happened in Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem, That's the only time I've seen a massive momentum. But this time, I'm glad to see that there's a lot more people talking about it, discussing it, telling the friends, telling the families. And it's all because of these protests. It's all because of the awareness that's being spread about it. And protests aren't just about standing in the street for 2 hours and then calling it a day and going home. It is reaching that audience that don't know, because we're all in the protest because we know what's going on, and we're there to obviously stop what's going on, spread the word about it. But what these have triggered in Liverpool especially is a new group made by students and young people that were not aware of what was going on, and they've named it Scousers for Palestine. And what it's done is it's actually created a little community where we've got businesses sharing, what's going on in Palestine. We've got donations going to the medical aid to Palestinians. It's reached about £5,000 as well. And that's all because of the protest we had last Sunday in town, which is really, really good. And he said that the old will die and the young will forget. But if you look at it now, no one's forgetting. You've got kids in the street marching, chanting Free Palestine. You've got young people joining all these groups. You've got, for example, Hamza and I sitting in and talking about the struggle as Palestinians ourselves. So there's never been a better time to sit there and spread the word, because if you've been to Palestine, you know that there's no one more generous than the Palestinian people. I sound very biased, and I am, because it's true. And also the culture is so rich and the history is so rich, and it's just a shame that when you mention Palestine to someone, the first thing they think about is Israel, war, death, bombs, destruction, and not actually the food, the dance, the culture, the clothes, the hospitality. So it's really important as well to emphasize what Palestine is actually known for, not what people think that it's known for. Take the politics aside and actually think about how amazing of a country it actually is. But that's all I've got to say on the matter. As like I said, I've got 8 screaming kids shouting me. So I'm going to get off there, but I know Audrey will update me about everything. But thank you so much for listening. And again, I'm so sorry.
Thank you for coming, and thanks to the children for letting you come.
Honestly, they're all knocking at my door. See you all later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, our next speaker should be Ayesha from Oxford. I don't think she's here. Are you here? In which case, I'm going to read you the text she sent me earlier on today. She said, "I'm sorry, I've had bad news. My close friend has been killed by the brutal Israeli regime. I'm completely devastated, and I don't know if I'll be able to speak tonight. I can't form a sentence without crying. But this is also making me want to come on the panel and do it for her." And then later she said, "I sent my apologies. I'm incredibly sorry, still grieving. My heart to know the world is silent to this genocide." I said to her, "You must grieve. By all means, come on the meeting if that helps honour her, but equally staying quiet and crying is if that's best for you. There's so many people weeping. We send our love to you and all who mourn your friend." It's heartbreaking. The next speaker is Roger Silverman. And Roger, I asked Roger to speak today, not just for the work he does internationally, but because of his history as part of the Silverman family and his work on anti-Semitism. Thank you, Roger.
All right, thank you, Felicity. We're living through a period of existential crisis. The sudden outbreak of war in Israel-Palestine is only the latest in a series of convulsive shocks. The word genocide is one that should be used only with caution, but Israel's blockade of Gaza, cutting off water, food and electricity while relentlessly bombing its helpless population, is virtually proclaimed by its perpetrators themselves in terms of genocide. So how has this come about? Let's remember, before the Nazi Holocaust, Zionism was little more than an outlandish sect. The Jews in Eastern Europe were a persecuted minority, forcibly confined to their own ghettos. They spoke their own language, not Hebrew, by the way, but Yiddish. They had a distinct culture, music, theatre, magazines, newspapers, and their political orientation was to the Socialist Bund. And the Bundists' riposte to the Zionists was, "We're going nowhere, this is our home." Even the terrible pogroms, which propelled a huge tidal wave of mass migration, including by my own ancestors, gave little sustenance to Zionist aspirations. But Zionism was cleverly exploited by British imperialism. With the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire, it would allow them to create an outpost within the turbulent oil-rich region. In the words of the first British military governor of Jerusalem, it would be, quote, "a loyal little Jewish Ulster in a sea of potentially hostile Arabism." With the Balfour Declaration in 1917, which was made during the First World War when the Ottoman Empire had crumbled, it deliberately cultivated Zionism as a strategic weapon, just as it later promoted Wahhabism and fanatical Islamic fundamentalism, one offshoot of that strategy, of course, being Hamas, to sow division in the Arab world. A Jewish homeland in Palestine would serve as an outpost to protect its access to the oil fields against the Arab Revolution and its control at that time of Egypt, the Suez Canal, and the route to India. Now, I recently found an interesting quotation by someone who had been reading Theodor Herzl's book on Zionism. Here's the quote. "The book interested me very much. Somehow this book touched a chord in me, and I took it all in." Who was the author of these lines? Adolf Eichmann. He continued, "It fell in with our own desire for a political solution. The Zionists wanted a territory where the Jewish people could finally settle in peace, and that was pretty much what the Nazis wanted." End of quote. By wiping out thriving settled communities and dispersing their pitifully few survivors, it was the Nazis who gave Zionism a plausible legitimacy. It was an acknowledgement of despair, an acknowledgement that anti-Semitism had prevailed. So it was a lasting legacy of Nazism. So in a sense, we can say that today's bloodbath in Palestine is really yet another horrific aftershock of the failure of the German Revolution of 1918 to 23. Now, in 1940, my father, Sidney Silverman, who was a left Labour MP, was chair of the British section of the World Jewish Congress. And in this capacity, he received a telegram warning of the impending Holocaust. He fought desperately for the right of refuge and asylum in Britain for Europe's Jews. But the Home Secretary in the wartime coalition government, Herbert Morrison, Peter Mandelson's grandfather, deliberately blocked entry by Jews fleeing the Holocaust. British immigration policy throughout that period was designed to keep out as many European Jews as possible, perhaps as 10 times as many as it let in. And then the Foreign Secretary in the post-war Labour government, Ernest Bevin, ordered the sinking of the ships carrying concentration camp survivors fleeing the misery of displaced persons internment camps to seek a homeland in Palestine. On their part, their aspiration was not to establish a Zionist state or to dispossess the Palestinians. They were simply desperate to find somewhere to live. So when Labour's right wing claimed to be friends of the Jews, let them be reminded of their murderous record of drowning them in the Mediterranean, just as migrants in the opposite direction are being drowned there today. In the Middle East, as in all the territories administered by the British Empire, a calculated policy of divide and rule was set in motion to promote communal conflict. We can still see the bloody consequences of this heritage of British civilization in ethnic conflicts around the world today, in Ireland, the Indian subcontinent, Sri Lanka, Cyprus, Palestine. In the Middle East, Israel became then a tool of US imperialism, a dependent client state enclave within the oil-rich Middle East as a bulwark against the Arab Revolution. So Zionism came to mean a racist apartheid regime, and now it's become an agent of extermination. The constant wars, the occupation of the West Bank, the blockade on Gaza, the colonial resettlements, the massacre of unarmed demonstrators, they're all monstrous crimes. But I think it's also true to say it would be a mistake to regard Zionism as a unique evil. The atrocities in Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank are every bit as horrific as the bloodbaths in Sharpeville in 1960, or Amritsar in 1919, or the tortures inflicted in the Kenya death camps, or the internment and assassination in Northern Ireland. But the comparison with the apartheid regime in South Africa is absolutely and completely accurate. Israel is explicitly defined as a Jewish state. Jews the world over have an automatic right to settle there. I could fly there tomorrow, not that I can assure you that I want to, but I could go there tomorrow and become a citizen. Arabs who lived there for generations were expelled and denied the right to return. Palestinians have been legally defined as second-class citizens. Socialists give solidarity to all victims of oppression, with the past Jewish victims of Nazism and equally with the current Palestinian victims of Zionism. We understand perfectly, of course, why, for instance, a Back to Africa movement developed among Black people in the USA, why Muslims in British India yearned for sanctuary within the subcontinent, and why Jewish Holocaust survivors were desperately seeking a homeland of their own. But we will not tolerate any state that is defined by ethnicity or religion, and Israel for the Jews any more than a Britain for the British. But history can't be unwritten. There are historical precedents in the settlement by equally desperate migrants to the Americas and the Antipodes and to South Africa. Terrible crimes of extermination were committed against the indigenous populations of all these countries, and similar crimes are being inflicted today against the Palestinians. We don't call for the expulsion of the descendants of these migrant settlers, nor for the abolition of Pakistan, whose settlers were also fleeing from massacres back home. Generations have grown up in Israel in the last 75 years, and they have no other home. But what we condemn is Israel's identity as a racially designated state in which non-Jews face discrimination and which acts as a regional military occupation power. That is the definition of apartheid. So what's the answer? Not, I would suggest, not two neighbouring hostile mini-states, and not even one single unwieldy state confined within that artificially designated strip of land. Following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, British and French imperialists ruthlessly carved up the region by drawing arbitrary lines on the map, the Sykes-Picot Plan. And as a result, sectarian conflicts have raged throughout the region ever since. Not only, of course, this most horrific, huge one in Israel-Palestine, but also in Lebanon, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Jordan. The only way out of the catastrophe, and it's not an easy solution, but it's the only one, is to unite all working people of the region within a common homeland of all communities in a harmonious socialist federation of the Middle East. So thanks, comrades.
Thank you very much, Roger. Very good of you to speak. Thank you. And someone's just asked, can we have a copy of that address to be circulated? And our next speaker is Allan Gibbons from the Liverpool Community Independence, where the massive movement of politics that's going on across the world is reflected in Britain in the changes within the Labour Party and the move of the Labour Party to the right, leaving the left basically without political representation and the class without political representation, which is even more important. So can we move now to Allan Gibbons?
Right, thanks very much, Felicity. I think my first point is just as history didn't start on October the 7th, as Audrey said, neither did Labour's attachment to Israel and Zionism. As a young man, I grew up in a very Labour household in a very Labour town. And I can remember in 1967 running home from school to see if brave Israel with the socialist kibbutzes had resisted the mass Arab armies. And then began a process as I went to university, talked to political activists, of understanding that history wasn't the history that I'd been fed in that Labour background, but actually the history of the Nakba, the history of 1936 and the Great Strike, the history right the way through of, Palestinian homes being bulldozed, of, the bombing in 2014, of the parceling up of land in the West Bank, cantonization, and slowly started to learn, if you want, a new view. And that's what gives me hope. If somebody from diametrically opposed views can be convinced to begin that process of change, I think we can strengthen the process of change to understand that history didn't begin on the 7th, that Palestinians don't suffer less, that there is only one kind of horror. And that's the narrative that the media and the established parties, particularly the Tories and Labour, have been trying to say, that there is only one kind of suffering. I was listening today when they were detailing, children burned. Well, don't they think that children being burned from bombs, laser-guided missiles from the sky, don't burn as horrifically and in as much pain as a child who burned in the massacres recently? Don't they think that distanced, horrific bombings that kill 5,000 people, that flatten entire neighbourhoods, aren't as horrific and the people don't suffer just as much? And I think we've got to systematically try to break this consensus that there is only one kind of suffering. I think we can see the beginnings of it already, because there's been a massive media attempt. I mean, you saw it over the way that Sunak stood up in Parliament and dismissed the Al Jazeera and Channel 4 challenge to the official version of events at the Al Ahli hospital. And there's an enormous and comprehensive attempt to prevent people understanding the reality. But despite that, you can start to see fractures already in that consensus. We have 23 Labour councillors, I think, have broken from Labour over the unprincipled position of supporting collective punishment. Labour tries to deny that Starmer said what he said on LBC, but Twitter has meant that everybody can see it for themselves. Bergen has put forward a motion that I think's got 80 signatures now from 8 different parties. Shamefully, there are some Liverpool MPs that have not signed up for it, and we have to put pressure on them. There was a poll that said 76% of the British people want a ceasefire. This is despite that overwhelming, almost universal narrative that only Israel is worthy of being considered to be suffering. And that's where I think there is the hope, that people, so many people, can see through the narrative, can doubt the narrative, can move from a humane approach to wanting to see justice for the Palestinian people. And we have to be part of that process. Now, I'm just going to, apparently there's only 3% of Labour voters who actually said there shouldn't be a ceasefire. Now, that's astonishing when you think of the position of the leader, and when you think of the rightward move, the expulsion of people from the Labour Party. That, again, is a straw of hope. Now, it matters that people try and break that consensus. The Greens have a principled position on Palestine. Our group is just 3 councillors who broke from Labour over fighting the cuts. Every single one of our councillors, though, was at the march on Sunday. It was the only organised political grouping from Liverpool City Council. And we have to put pressure on those other councillors. 61 Labour councillors. It's just a few years since the whole of Labour conference was festooned with Palestinian flags. Some of that mood is still there, even after the demolition. And we have to embarrass the hell out of that Labour group. We're planning to do an open letter to Liam Robinson. We will try and get a motion to full council. We'd already planned to do a motion resisting the banning of BDS. Now, these will be ruled out of order. The way it works is that you have proportionality. The majority group has more access to motions. They've got 61, we've got 3. But what it does mean is those will be on the order paper as rejected motions. We will publicise them. We will try to break up the consensus that basically you can have collective punishment of the Palestinian people. You can cut off energy and water. You can conduct war crimes of carpet bombing. I think it's somebody said 60% of hospitals now are inoperable because of the denial of energy. And I think you can also see how that can work internationally. I mean, some of the demonstrations, Yemen, Egypt, Barcelona, Paris, against the police ban that people talked about are huge. And that is definitely having an effect. We can see it in the prevarication of Nandi and Lamy and Starmer himself, trying to sound humanitarian while still refusing to say we need a ceasefire. We'll be putting forward a motion calling for ceasefire and for the end of the siege of Gaza. And even in Israel, I think you can see some of the embarrassing scenes for Netanyahu, that he hasn't been seen as this great protector of security, this great war leader, brother of a hero, which his own image of himself. He has been heckled on a whole number of occasions. And so that process can begin locally and it can join like a tributary to an international movement of protest. But it starts with us. I mean, there's no point whatsoever us looking with vicarious pleasure at things happening in different places. It can give us courage and enthusiasm, but ultimately we've got to look at practically what we can do to make sure the next demonstration from the bombed out church at 2 o'clock on Sunday through to Derby Square is even bigger than last week. And we packed Derby Square. We've got to make sure that we try and get every political tendency to fight leaders who will not denounce the war crimes by the Israeli state. And if we can begin that process, I think we can be part of a movement which actually sees the beginning of the possibility of justice for the Palestinian people. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Allan. And our next speaker is Jabu Nala Hartley, who's recently resigned as an Oxford City Councillor. Jabu is born in South Africa and knows too well what apartheid means. Some of us know Jabu also through her campaigning on the NHS issues. But Jabu, can you please contribute to this discussion?
Thank you, Felicity. Thank you all that have spoken here today. It's a really deeply moving, meeting. As Felicity has said, my background is deeply rooted in the commitment for social justice and human rights. Obviously, my inspired politics comes from the mere fact that I was raised in South Africa during apartheid. So I know too well what apartheid means in terms of the people that were affected by the system. Over the years, my concern has been particularly focused on the ongoing crisis in Palestine, the suffering of the people in that region who have endured so much conflict, economic hardships, and political instability. It deeply troubles me. It troubles me, and I believe it is our moral obligation to address this issue and to stand in solidarity with the oppressed, regardless of their geographic location. I'm going to go back to the Oxford scene at the moment, what is happening in Oxford in terms of the stand that we took. When we were selected in 2019, along with 6 councillors that have resigned, it's 8 councillors that have resigned, but the 6 are the ones that were identified as being on the left. We took a pledge in 2019, which we signed. I think this pledge was driven by the fact that we could see on our doorstep as we were campaigning for the 2019 election that the campaigning wasn't to campaign for the Labour government, but the campaign was more to outsit Jeremy Corbyn. It was very, very distressing as a kind of socialist campaigners to be listening to the right as we were door knocking, telling people in our neighborhoods that Jeremy Corbyn was not an effective leader. We had a real battle with these conflicted messages. So part of our, before we were even elected, we used our numbers. There were 17 of us. We wrote this pledge. We knew that they were not going to get rid of all of us at once. So we took our chance. I will quote what we said with this pledge. We said, we stand unwavering solidarity with oppressed peoples everywhere in their struggle for human rights and liberation, including through the use of economic boycotts, disinvestment, and sanctions. These peaceful tactics have been used by international solidarity movements throughout history, including helping to secure the downfall of the apartheid regime in South Africa. They remain a powerful strategy to combat oppression in Palestine and around the world. And we stood by that. This was signed by 17 incoming candidates and councillors. All of us, the councillors that have resigned, did sign this pledge. So I'm very proud to say we have always shown our unwavering commitment to the Palestinian cause. But more than anything, just to go back to what's been happening in Oxford, it was really, really interesting last week because we deliberately chose to use an AMM, which was live. We were really like, try to be very secretive so that it wasn't moved to Zoom, because we felt that the resignation will have the maximum effect. As chair of the Labour Party, I've been chair of the Labour Party for the last 3 years. I was tasked with chairing that meeting. I chose to chair that meeting because it was going to be my last meeting, and I wanted to make sure that I controlled it to the point that it basically, what you call platform, the Palestinian issue from the beginning till the end. And I'm very proud to say I achieved that, because some of the motions like the BDS had been taken off through events insistent of taking off such motions in our agenda. So it was quite interesting, because I then used various segments like any other business matters arising throughout the whole. We basically galvanized the whole meeting till the end, and it was a real victory in terms of the protest for fighting for Palestine. But I was really, really proud to have been able to hold that till the end. And in the end, I was able to deliver my speech, which was really much centrally focusing on my relationship with Palestine, and the fact that even my late President Nelson Mandela vehemently stated that our struggle with Palestine was intertwined. Our struggle with Palestine was one. So in my opinion, he long called Israel an apartheid state, long before they were trying to deny that Israel is an apartheid state. And I am proud to come from a tradition of the dockers that once boycotted the Israeli ship and said, we won't offload here in Durban. These are the types of these are the types of actions that we need to see boldly everywhere to actually really fight this Zionist attack on innocent people of Gaza. We need to show them that we won't stand for it. Earlier today, I went to another march, which was another event which was held in Oxford, which was what we call organized by Oxford University students, calling out their university in its complicity with selling arms to Israel. It was a huge march, huge success today, and I was happy to be part of that. Oxford is proving itself to be really, really resilient. There's been so many forms of action here. We've had bikes, fighting for Palestine. We've had so many issues. Even this week, I was so proud. I didn't even know. I walked into Oxford Brookes University, and there were young people with a huge table offering lovely cakes with a huge Palestinian flag. And I didn't have any pennies, but because I had the badge, I got a free cake. So there's a lot that is going on. But what I have really stated to the Labour Party, and it was a really good platform in terms of the messaging, because we seem to speak to ourselves. Everyone here doesn't need convincing about what is happening in Palestine. The people that we need to speak to are these people who are burying their heads in the sand. So the AMM was really, really powerful in terms of gaining the attention of our MP, Annalise Dodds, our leader, Susan Brown, who are busy copying and pasting statements to us as members, telling us that Israel has a right to defend itself. I got a really good opportunity to tell them that had they been in opposition, Mandela would have died in prison. Because the way I feel about this Labour Party, it is now complicit in this genocide. And it would have not intervened in terms of people like Dennis Healy going to South Africa in 1986 and going to the township and going to see Mandela in prison to see if his conditions were still, to see if he was still being looked after properly, or he was okay health-wise. You can't be looked after properly in prison. So my point is the councillors that we have here in Oxford have taken a bold stand against the Stammer regime, which is something that I am proud of, even though Luke Akehurst has begun his useless smear campaign. It is really critical to understand what is happening here. Not only have we managed to stop, we've also managed to challenge the majority now in terms of the Labour Party in Oxford was in kind of like in control of the majority, but it's now 24 to 24 in terms of the decisions that we can make. So the strategy now is to go forward and try and do something for our communities as independents. But like the Gaza, like the Palestinian people, our marginalized areas in Oxford are also suffering under this Labour neoliberal regime. I don't know how much I've spoken, and I don't want to take up too much time, but I just want to say, growing up in South Africa has given me an insight of what is happening in Gaza. We didn't have the sort of intensity of bombs being dropped in our township, but we had the South African regime, apartheid regime, ransacking townships and shooting indiscriminately against. You saw this even if you can go on YouTube, it's there. So we have got a common cause with Palestine, but also beside being a South African, as a socialist, we have a common cause. These are our brothers and sisters. We can't sit back and take this. They are being exterminated like they don't deserve to live. And we must challenge. I know a lot of people are saying Stammer will take on the next government. Let's make it hard for him. Let's challenge him. Let's hold him to account for this statement that he made and ask him, how dare you call yourself a human rights lawyer, and yet you can damn people to their death. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And our final speaker is Andrew Feinstein. I'm aware there's a couple of hands up wanting to speak, but I'd like to get through our invited speakers first, please. So Andrew, he's from For the Many Network, and he's previously an ANC MP in Mandela's government, and now lives in England. So Andrew.
Thanks very much. And thank you very much for the invitation, and to all the organizers for putting together this event, and for all of you for being here. Can I just start by paying respect to Comrade Jabu and her colleagues in Oxford for their principled resignation. We have seen a number of people resigning from the Labour Party. We've seen some councillors resigning, and more people should be doing this. People who are actually committed to human rights, people who regard themselves as socialists. I want to start by reminding us that there are many people in this country and elsewhere who are making billions of pounds out of this tragic, appalling situation in Palestine. Britain has sold hundreds of millions of pounds of weapons to Israel over the past few years, ignoring the historic sales over decades. Over the past 2 weeks, we have seen the share prices of arms companies skyrocket. And let's not forget that these defense companies, BAE Systems, Rolls-Royce, Kinetic, etc., these companies are massively subsidized by our tax pounds. In addition, the unconditional support for whatever Israel wants to do from both the government and the opposition make us, as a country, complicit in war crimes. They have ignored the reality that you either have the international rule of law for everyone equally, or we have a world of anarchy and chaos. They ignore their own hypocrisy of praising the actions of Ukrainians who are fighting back against the invasion of their country, while condemning Palestinians doing the same thing as murderous terrorists. They are condemning Vladimir Putin, correctly in my opinion, for the attacks on civilians in Ukraine by the Russian military, while praising and supporting even worse, brutal military action by the Israeli state. You know, the irony is that it is a time like this that we would wish for a strong opposition led by a human rights lawyer. Instead, we have a leader of the opposition who lacks humanity, lacks any common sense commitment to natural justice or basic rights for all. So what can we do? What can we as progressives around the UK do in this awful situation? First of all, we must not only organize locally, but importantly, we must communicate amongst ourselves. And it's for this reason that a number of us have created the For the Many network that was launched in Liverpool very recently, where we are creating community hubs around the country that will share resources, speakers, information, and ideas amongst progressives, wherever we are located, whether we're inside the Labour Party, outside the Labour Party, in other parties that have formed. all on the basis of a commitment to 12 principles that broadly echo the 2017 Labour Party manifesto. So let us ensure that we're communicating and networking with each other, that we're coordinating our action and sharing the resources that we have. Then we have to loudly and in huge numbers demand an urgent ceasefire. We need to call for an immediate halt to arms sales to Israel that violate British law, violate international treaties of which we are signatories, like the Arms Trade Treaty, and make us complicit in Israel's war crimes. And then, as has been mentioned already, for those of you who are up to it, join in direct action against these arms companies that are weaponizing Israel. Look online for Palestine Action and the activities and actions that they are taking and get involved in that. Many of their members have been arrested and have then been released when magistrates have determined that in trying to destroy weapons that are being sent to Israel for use in the occupied territories, they are committing a minor crime in order to prevent far more major crimes. We must also never forget the anti-racist character of this struggle. There is no place in this struggle for anti-Semitism, for Islamophobia, for anti-Black racism, for any form of discrimination. We must reiterate that every life is sacred, and we must not allow false allegations of anti-Semitism to be used to silence Palestinian voices and those of us who support Palestine. I mean, the absurdity of seeing the Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg being accused of anti-Semitism because she had a little octopus on her shoulder, an octopus that is used by autistic children to help them manage day-to-day in this world, and it being likened to anti-Semitic tropes from centuries ago. That is the absurdity to which this weaponization has gone. And finally, we must intensify the call for BDS against Israel. As Comrade Jabu has said, it was crucial in the struggle to free South Africa from apartheid, and it will be crucial in the struggle to free Israel and Palestine from apartheid and occupation. Never before have the words of my former boss, Nelson Mandela, been as important and as appropriate. Our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinian people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you all the other speakers. We've had a fantastic set of speakers today with many different slants on how this issue should be taken. And you know, one of my big campaigns is around the issues of maternity, and seeing the number of children killed in this war is absolutely heartbreaking, and we can't let that go. We can't let that issue die. But I'm going to call in now people who've asked, can they speak? And can we keep people's contributions to no more than 3 minutes, please? And then we'll have time at the end for a quick summary from any of the speakers who want to do that. So Dawn.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Where do I start? I mean, I've been to Palestine about 17 years ago, and I just take my headphones. I just feel outraged, and just I can't really hardly listen to the news anymore, particularly because of such a one-sided, lopsided narrative. I mean, I'm a journalist myself, and to see the blatant, just bias is just, it's beyond the pale. I mean, it's, what do you say? I mean, I was looking today for something on the internet because I knew it was out there, of the historic amount of prisoners being detained, Palestinian prisoners being detained by Israel, particularly children who were just like thrown rocks, and who are not just getting tortured, but beaten, psychologically, sexually, physically abused. And yet, Israel is up in arms over the hostages that Hamas took, upon what happened on the 7th, upon Hamas taking a stand into Israel. And I just find that, I mean, these people have been detained in their hundreds for years and years and years by Israel, and the media aren't mentioning that. Nobody's mentioning it. Nobody's looking at that. And so I put it on Facebook, and people need to see this, remember this, and don't talk about Hamas being a terrorist state, because I hope this doesn't sound naive or inflammatory or anything, but just like the IRA were defending Ireland against the British Army and all that apartheid with Northern Ireland, if you like. As far as I know, I mean, Hamas is an elected group. I mean, they're probably corrupt as any group, whether it's Israel or in the West or whatever. But they are actually at the end of the day, as Andrew Feinstein said, defending their homes, their lands, their livelihoods, everything. And I just think, I find it, really, on the one hand, it's hard to see how us as socialists, particularly, because we really don't have a voice. I mean, in this political deadlock of the two-party system, it's hard to see how we can actually break through that and make a difference. As we're barely, just organizing to have our own voice as it is within the UK. On the other hand, I was at the demo last Saturday, and I was at all the Stop the War demos back in the 2000s with Iraq and everything, and it felt on that scale. I mean, don't tell me 100,000. It was easily maybe 250,000. So I just feel like I kind of feel divided as to whether or not we can make an impact. But I just feel, for me, just keep educating, and I don't know, just on an individual basis, even if we feel powerless. I mean, I kind of feel a little bit powerless in the whole face of everything, the right-wing media and the rest of it. But I just kind of feel that also, if you find any morsel of anything that's not being put out on the MSM, the mainstream media, put it out there. That's all I've got to say.
Sorry, the next person's Rob. Apologies.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Can.
Brilliant. I was just going to say that I think that as much as I love seeing support from outside of the Houses of Parliament, to be really effective, we need someone on the inside to help to represent us. And at the moment, we can't vote for Tories or Labour. And a lot of the people are really struggling with saying they don't know how to vote, who to vote for. I've spoken to councillors who are appalled with Labour, who don't want to jump ship because there's nowhere to jump to. I've heard and spoken to many Muslims who say we really want to vote for someone, but now we can't vote for Labour. They don't know who to vote for. So I was thinking that at the moment we've got smaller parties such as Lib Dems, Greens, and Plaid Cymru, etc., and then the newer parties like Transform. Individually, that they're very small, and we know our voting system is designed to keep small parties, to keep them small, to make a lot of their votes get wasted. And it sort of leads to a narrative where it's either the Tories or Labour will win, and all the other ones are a wasted vote. So what if we create an alliance between multiple small parties, saying that on the condition that if they're approached for a coalition, they are all treated as one united party, they can then work together across the country, so that instead of having Lib Dems struggling and the Greens struggling and Plaid Cymru struggling and Independents struggling, you could have effectively one united party with 20% of the vote behind them. Is that what would happen if you united the smaller parties? From that position, you're only 5% behind the Tories. So you could just get 5% more of the vote, say, from the people who aren't Labour anymore, then you could become the opposition party and we could have a real impact. So I know there's some people who don't like the Lib Dems, but currently there is no other choice when it comes to politics. It's literally, if there's a better way to get representation in Parliament, I'd love to hear it, but all the smaller parties have been stuck in limbo. And if you look at the voter turnout of these by-elections where Labour are saying how popular they are, you'll notice that the turnout drops from 70% to 40%. So somewhere since the last election, there's 30% of people who are willing to be engaged and vote who have no one to vote for. We just need to give them someone to vote for. So if we get the Lib Dems and Greens and Independents, we can have Jeremy and Corbyn fighting side by side with Transform and Plaid Cymru and Greens and Lib Dems, and they can present a real viable alternative to just Labour or Tories. They could change the narrative that's being forced on us, which is that the Tories definitely going to lose, Labour definitely going to win, and there's no choice. I would love to hear that being taken forward, because no one listens to one guy with his opinion. But if we could step forward as a group, maybe we can get some of the higher other organisations, such as from the Many Network, to listen to us.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure we can take that issue up, particularly in this meeting, but I think we can hear it. Aman?
Thank you. I just wanted to add a couple of points, if I may. I think a few things have to be said. On one hand, in Gaza and also in the West Bank, during the last few years, we have had huge amount of protests that have been taking place. Protests for the rights of the people of Palestine in variety of manners. There have been protests against Hamas. There have been protests against the governing bodies in Palestine. And also, we have had a broad protest in the whole of Middle East. I think some of that background is also part of what is happening now. The question that the media is trying to pose is that we have to be on the side of Hamas or we have to be on the side of Israel. That narrative has not washed across the board. I think whether we're looking at US, whether we're looking at Europe, and whether we look at even as far as Australia and many other countries, the narrative that is either Israel or Hamas doesn't wash anymore. The issue of Arab and Israeli changed to the issue of Palestine and Israel over the decades. Now it's being moved to the issue of Hamas and Israel. The issue really is the rights of the people of Palestine to be recognized as citizens. That's the main issue. I think the only answer for the real life, real freedom of people in Palestine, in Israel and Middle East, obviously is through socialist revolutions. The question is, what would be the best scenarios that could be provided in order to make that situation to occur? And one of the main difficulties at the moment, one of the main ways of actually healing this wound that has been spreading, and it's been the use and abused by the reactionary states across the Middle East, by Israel, by the West, and everything else, has been the issue of the state for Palestine. Whether we're looking at it as something which is achievable, immediate, that is something which can be done. And therefore, the issue of two states is still one issue that is being addressed. And immediate ceasefire, I think, has to be said, is a demand, but also at the same time, the immediate aid for people of Gaza and people of Palestine, ensuring that the people, after all of the suffering they've had, to be able to have equal rights and therefore compensation for all of them because of the atrocities of Israel. And also, I think the main issue which has been changed across the whole public spectrum in this recent set of events has been the case of recognition of crime, war crime, crime against humanity, and genocide. And this does not encompass just the state of Israel, which should be definitely brought to justice, but also it calls for all its accomplices from the variety of states, whether it's the Chancellor of Germany or whether it is the variety of governments who have been abating Israel throughout this process, but also individuals in the media, individuals in the different states who probably are not even prime ministers or ministers. And this needs a huge amount of pressure, which I think has been building up from below massively. And this is, I think, the change that we are seeing today. A huge alteration of the idea that previously was generally understood that Israel is correct, everybody else who fights Israel is a terrorist. That has been changed, and this is something we can build on. I would very much doubt that we could get this voice heard within the states. I think the main idea would be how we can force them to accept this scenario, rather than actually thinking how we could actually effectively creep in there, hoping that they would do something. I think that pressure is what actually makes them change the same way as it had been done in other situations before. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person is Leslie.
Thanks to all the speakers and everyone who's turned up, because it feels very bleak, as other people said. You know, we all feel horribly angry and upset at both what's happening to the Palestinians, but also the level of propaganda and state violence egged on by all the various capitalist states, particularly in the West, and then the Arab states basically standing back as they have done for many years. And I think Tom made a really important point about channeling anger, and you know, obviously we can do that through some of the things that have been suggested. But I just wanted to say as well, October the 7th is like, if you put a pressure cooker and jam the lid on, turn the heat up for 70 years, then inevitably you'll get what you've what you've had. But obviously we need to organise here in our own country and extend the hand of solidarity to organise against apartheid, occupation and genocide. But there's just two little glimpses of hope, I feel, that this in the last week or so that have been important. I mean, in America, and obviously with that weight of the whole, you know, Zionist propaganda machine, where people are sent, young people are sent from America to Israel to be indoctrinated, basically. But the fact that loads of American Jews went to the Capitol and sat in and chanted, "Not in my name," 500 of them were arrested. You know, that is, it's a small, but it is a small sign of, you know, of a hope. One of the things that we can do here is where people have spoken out and been victimised for speaking out, we really need to support them. I mean, there's been battles going on over so-called anti-Semitism, which we, you know, I'm not going to repeat. But obviously recently there's been examples where people have been, you know, suspended from work, for instance, for even hinting that they might support Palestine. And again, you know, as socialists and trade unionists, we really need to support and stop those people from being victimised. And the other just slightly optimistic thing, there was the Department of Health and Social Security put Israeli flags up on their buildings, and a number of people involved in, you know, as current or retired health workers got a letter of protest together to demand that they take that flag down, and obviously making some other points, and that got thousands of signatures practically overnight. And again, it's a very small thing, but it's also been sent, as I understand, to the Palestine trade unions. But just even small actions like that, and obviously bigger actions to stop the arms trade, you know, encouraging those in those industries to take action, docs to take action, etc., to build those sort of actions and build those direct links as well with people on the ground. So solidarity to you all.
I don't think there's any other hands up. Can I invite, there was a comrade who spoke from the Kurds in the chat. Would you like to make your point now? No? Okay, that's fair enough. But I think we need to remember the plight of the Kurds and the plight also of the Rohingya, who have been nearly 1 million of them displaced from Myanmar into Bangladesh, and you know, we've had some contact with them. I've had some contact with them over trying to get adequate education for them in that huge refugee camp, and obviously the situation in Lebanon as well. Right, I'm going to ask our speakers. Hang on. Vital would like to speak. Would you like to speak, please, before I go to our speakers?
Yes, please, if I may. Thank you so much to all the speakers for your presentations. And Felicity, thank you very much for introducing, and everyone's made such useful, important points. I was just thinking, there's no time to go into all the ins and outs of the background and everything. Everything that's been said is, well, a lot of it is largely right. And we have to, you know, continue to build this movement. We've got to take part in these marches and so on. And, you know, last Saturday's march was obviously so much bigger than the previous Saturday's march. And let's hope there'll be another, you know, great turnout this time. Certainly, you know, all the groups, PSC and CND, everyone's been doing a lot to muster all the support they can. But, at the same time, I think we've got to recognize, you know, Hamza was making a point initially when he said that not everyone's a supporter of Hamas and so on. What's happened is that it's bred, and other speakers have also pointed out that what has happened in Palestine, this suppression, this oppression over the decades, has bred a particular kind of politics. And you just look at the PLO, what has happened over there, the difference between West Bank, Gaza, all this kind of thing. And it's become a very, very complicated and highly dangerous scenario. It is a tinderbox. We've seen that it's a tinderbox. And I sometimes think that, you know, it's almost as if liberals, progressives, in calling out, in saying that that this is a reactionary way to go, this kind of violence is actually backward looking. I think we sort of feel scared because we'll simply be treated as giving in to Israeli propaganda, something like that. We should have the courage of our convictions. We should say, yes, this is progressive, this is not. We're going to be behind, you know, standing behind the Palestinian cause all the way. We've done it for decades. We're going to carry on doing it. But if there are complications within this whole situation, I think we've got to at least admit it among ourselves, is all I would say. But on the whole, I would think the speakers have spoken very well. I feel very disturbed sometimes by the nature of the discussion that's come up. And recently I've had it in my own groups and so on, you know. And that's why I'm saying it over, because I think it will be understood here. Thank you very much.
Sorry, would Andrew like to say some words in terms of closing remarks?
Sure. Just two things. I think, you know, looking at some of what is in the chat, we need to be a little bit cautious about placing our faith in the mainstream politicians at this point. You know, I think even though, of course, there have been changes in Lib Dem leadership, a lot of the people in the Lib Dem leadership were still senior members of the party when they joined the coalition government. and they promised the world, including that they would never allow tuition fees for students. And within days of joining the coalition government, they were very happy to impose tuition fees, which are really making it incredibly difficult for a lot of people to get a post-school education in this country now, and saddling those who are fortunate enough to be able to do it with tens of thousands of pounds of debt before they earn a penny. We should also recall that Vince Cable, who, when in opposition, was a huge opponent of the British arms trade, in government became business secretary and became the salesperson in chief of that very same arms trade. And he would hear no bad words spoken against BAE Systems, against our sales to various dictatorial, murderous regimes around the world. I think that there is something building on the left. There are many groups that are coming up on the left. I think the most important thing at the moment is for all of us to be coordinating, to be networking. In the chat, there's how to get hold, how to be in contact with the For the Many network. I think we all need to be networking amongst the different groups on the left. And I think we need to find new alternatives that basically change the political debate and change the nature of our politics and economics. I also think that we are seeing, with the tragic, awful events in Israel-Palestine, we are seeing a shift of momentum. While it feels awful to say this, when people have lost their lives, when so many have suffered to such an appalling degree, but this could be disastrous for Israel and for its racist, murderous regime. BDS and forces that are opposed to Israel's appalling government could get a huge boost from Israel's indefensible actions in the occupied territories at the moment. And it's up to us to try and ensure that that is the outcome of this absolutely awful situation. So thank you again to all of the organizers and to all of you who have been a part of tonight's event.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jabu, do you want to say another couple of words?
I think following what Andrew has just said, really, for me, it's just to continue to intensify the work that we're doing. I think we're all doing very well in terms of galvanizing the communities. As I said earlier, on this platform, we are preaching to the converted. We need to be in our communities, talking to the youth, talking to various people that have been marginalized and locked out of the political system. This is why I was perceived as a threat in Oxford, because I managed to mobilize those people. In my area in Batin, they were seen as just political fodder, people that didn't vote, but they did something incredible at the height of Brexit. They voted for me as a Black woman and decided that I should be their city councillor. So it's really important to see how the tide is shifting in terms of the people that are seen as not being engaged. Let's engage them. They are the future.
Thank you very much. And Allan, just a few minutes. Robinson, I will call you in a minute, okay?
I mean, I only want to make 2 points. I mean, the first one, I think it's very optimistic to think you could have a broad kind of progressive front involving the pro-austerity, Lib Dems, etc. Most of the groups that were mentioned are very firm on wanting to fly under their party banner. I think our priority has to be to develop the principled left, to support, you know, the For the Many coalition, and to probably get along to the November 25th conference of Transform. These are the people who are actually trying to put forward, you know, a militant socialist kind of platform for the future. People raised whether there will be, you know, candidates on the left at the election. Hopefully there will. I mean, the discussion just getting underway. realistically, I think it'd be fairly modest numbers. We're certainly thinking as LCI of looking at one of the right-wing Labour MPs on Merseyside and standing in that constituency. Early days, but I mean, I think we've got to open up that debate about what we're capable of having. Final thing I'd just say is it all starts with action. So let's make sure in Liverpool we've got a fantastic turnout on Sunday, 2 o'clock at the bombed out church, and let the people know, like last week, that we've got a vibrant movement in solidarity with the Palestinian people.
Thank you. We have a speaker, L. Robinson, or I. Robinson, I'm not sure which it is, who has his hand up. Can you just speak quickly, please? Because I'm really at the stage of asking the speakers to reply.
Okay, the only thing that I wanted to say very quickly is that what we need to do as a people, as world citizens, is to make sure that our governments are not allowing we're not allowing our governments to create the narrative that if you are pro-Palestinian for the people in Palestine, that you are promoting anti-Semitism, and that is not the case. And our governments are just doing a wonderful job at creating that narrative, and we need to stop that. That's the one thing that I want to get across to everyone, and make sure that we are promoting peace for people and for the useless killing of the Palestinian people who are not, they're just victims of circumstance, and we're not allowing our governments, and I live in the US, to create the narrative that if you are pro-Palestine, you are anti-Israel or promoting anti-Semitism.
Oh, thank you very much. That is the message of the meeting. Thank you for joining us in that. Thank you. And the next person that we losing my piece of paper. The next person I have to ask, would they like to say something, is Roger Silverman. But before I say that, I want to say something about Roger's dad. That Roger's dad was a conscientious objector during World War I, and that he and John Hamilton Sr. in Liverpool both were reviled during World War I, and yet afterwards, for having raised the standard of the ideas of socialism, they were taken on as leaders, and both of them used the tactic of speaking in the streets to meetings, and it was from that speaking in the streets tradition that John Hamilton Sr. was elected to the council, and that Roger's dad, Sidney Silverman, was elected to be an MP. Let's go back to speaking on the streets on the issues that we think are important. Roger.
Oh, well, I just want to say what a really inspiring meeting this has been. There's been great contributions, and there's a real change taking place in British society and in world society. We are in the middle of a period of worldwide uprisings, and it's coming in Britain. You can feel it. On the question of, in this absolutely surprising mobilization that we've seen in support of the Palestinians, that's one side of the movement of revolt against the existing system and the existing society. I'm not going to enter into the discussion about unity with Lib Dems and all the rest of it, except to say the issue is not overthrowing the Tory government. It's not denying Starmer a majority. The issue is changing society, and we're not going to get allies among any of the capitalist parties to do that. The next election it's quite clear from the by-elections or these so-called stunning victories for Starmer. In nearly every case, the vote for Labour has been drastically lower than even in 2019, never mind in 2017. What we're seeing is an unpopularity contest. The reason why Labour is winning is that the Tories are even more unpopular than Labour is so far. But the danger is what we're going to see with the Starmer government pursuing outright and unadulterated Tory policies is we'll see what we're seeing everywhere else in Europe, the rise of the far right. from Italy, which used to have the biggest mass communist party outside the Soviet bloc, to Sweden, the social democratic mecca of the past, to even I see that in Switzerland now the far right has had huge gains and is the largest party, and we're going to see after a Starmer government we could see a really ugly situation and a real polarization and a real movement towards an all-out class war. So thanks, comrades.
Thank you for those cheerful comments, Roger. The next person is Audrey.
Yeah, you know, I just like to say a few things. That, you know, this really is the time of monsters. You know, the American, you know, regime, if you like, is flailing around frantically, causing havoc, you know, across the planet. But what you can say is, you know, internationally, working class people are waking up and have done for the, you know, for a long time now, since the collapse of the economies in 2008, the world economy. You're seeing this absolute politicization of workers and you know, through industrial action and so on that's going on, through the betrayal of these, you know, the Starmers of the world, and the Tony, even through the period of Tony Blair's leadership and so on, that although we feel we understand this as having no voice for workers, that workers themselves are finding their own voice in industrial action, but also with what's happening in Palestine now, seeing that internationally they have more in common with workers in France and Germany and, you know, across the globe, in feeling horrified with what's going on in Palestine. So, you know, I think we need to be looking in this country. We need to have a positive look on what workers are doing, the direction workers are having, because there is a real hatred. We don't have to talk about the Tories anymore. We talk about the hatred of Labour. We talk about the hatred of the betrayal of the people that we believed at one time would have been the voice of the working class. So we've got to replace that with the movement itself, the strength of communities, organising from the grass level, where we all fight where we stand, and we have a series of independence, and we link up through For the Many network, because we're not competing with each other that way. We're not saying you shouldn't be in that party, you should be in another party. What we're saying is fight where you stand, coordinate our work together, make ourselves powerful, and out of that, somewhere or other, a mass workers' party will arise, because only through unity will it ever arise. You can't announce it, you can't declare it. It will arise through the movement itself, from workers being so sick of not being represented that we stand ourselves to fight for justice and a more peaceful world, and victory to Palestine. And we always have to include, this is the last thing, we always have to include end the occupation. Otherwise, we're asking Palestinians to go right back to square one after they've been through all this. Every single time we repeat a slogan, we have to say, end the occupation.
Thank you, Audrey. And ceasefire. Tom, can I ask you to come in? You started the conversation, and I think you started it very, very well. Would you like to finish our conversation for us?
Thanks, Felicity, and thanks for everyone who's here, and to all the other contributors. Look, just a few quick points focused on the plight of the Palestinians in Gaza and more widely, because we all know that slaughter of the Palestinians is being carried out as we speak. Collective punishment, mass movements, unimaginable conditions. The trickle of so-called aid going through the Rafah crossing is nowhere approaching what is necessary. Power is running out. Babies and incubators are going to have those incubators switched off. The death toll is ticking ever upward. And the ground invasion, the threatened, the promised ground invasion that Israel is planning hasn't even taken place yet. Further slaughter, further atrocities, further murderous acts, further collective punishment, further deadly actions and further disaster are on the cards. And this could unfold in the next couple of weeks. And that's where our absolute focus has to be at the moment, I think. If you're organised in any way, if you're active in any way, if you're concerned in any way about the current situation, this is what we need to focus on in the next couple of weeks. Already mass mobilisations, mass protests have developed around this issue. The largest demonstration in British history in solidarity with the Palestinians has taken place. That should give us hope. All of the other questions that I think that have come up here about the future shape of British politics hinge, I think, around this particular issue, and who knows what will grow out of it. And so our immediate priority has to be responding to the calls from the Palestinians themselves. And that means raising our sights in terms of the sort of mobilization and the sort of action that we can take. Because if we can get hundreds of thousands onto the streets of this country, if we can build on the movement and the moves within inside the trade union movement around the issues that the Palestinian trade unions have raised, then we will have a real impact, not just on British politics, but on the politics in Palestine itself. But we also need to keep an eye on how things develop more widely in the Middle East. There are, the US is obviously positively itching for the chance to respond to anything else that might happen in the Middle East. That is why they've sent 2 aircraft carrier groups to the region. That is why Biden is standing side by side. That's why Sunak went out there. That's why other leaders of NATO member states have been out there, because they have their sights on the Middle East. Once again, this is a potentially deadly situation more widely. And I'll just come back to this point in terms of this, the reality of what is happening in Palestine at the moment. 18,000 Gazans had work permits to either work in the West Bank or in Israel itself prior to the latest upsurge in violence. 18,000 of them. 18,000 Gazans are trapped outside of Gaza. Where are they? How are they being treated? Where are they being contained? I heard this morning from Palestinian trade unionists that they suspect that these 18,000 are being kept in camps, are being kept in prisons, imprisoned within Israel itself. This is the reality, and all of our actions, all of our activity, all of our focus needs to be focused on exposing the realities of what's happened. The thousands of arrests, in the West Bank and in Palestine itself of Palestinians, the historic levels of detention and incarceration, the historic legacy of the absolutely appalling mistreatment of the Palestinians themselves. And that's why me and CND and others more widely are focused on the Palestinians' calls for BDS, are focused on supporting and exposing the reality of the apartheid regime in Israel itself. And it's why, in terms of the larger situation and the more expensive situation in that region, it's important to remember, and it's important to raise whenever we can, that when we're talking about Israel and the Palestinians, we're talking about a nuclear armed state, one which is armed to the teeth through so-called aid from the rest of the world. This country, the United States, and more widely. We're talking about one of the most highly militarized societies, a nuclear armed society, versus the Palestinian people. And unless we can take action, unless we can mobilize, unless we can operationalize the call of our friends and comrades in Palestine for the sort of direct action that Andrew and others have spoken about, unless we can do that, then the slaughter that is already being carried out against Gaza will only get worse, will only intensify, and we risk it developing into an all-out regional conflict. So Allan said it all starts with action, and I couldn't agree anymore. Now is the time for action. Now is the time for us to raise our sights. Now is the time to put all the other issues to one side and go all out to make sure we mobilise, organise and stop in whatever way we can the very worst from unfolding for the Palestinian people. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom. And I think at that point, we're going to call the meeting to a close. I will write to everyone who signed up on the Eventbrite to give them a copy of this meeting. I'm putting my personal email in the chat. So that anyone who didn't come in through the Eventbrite can get hold of me, and I will send it to you. We've done something good here tonight, comrades. We really have done something good. We've talked about it. We've worked on the basis of education, agitation, organise. We've done a bit of everything, but we've got to do a hell of a lot more. So thank you for attending. Look out for the recording when I send it to you. And let's keep in touch and build on this issue. Thank you very much. I'm going to move my screen to sharing a screen with some issues on it that I thought would be useful. Sorry, no, I'm not. It's not going to work. So I'll send it just separately when we come to the end of the meeting. Thank you for coming. Keep in touch. The people of Palestine need us, and we need to make sure that we build a better world with the people of Palestine. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Felicity. Thanks, everyone. Go well.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you for all our speakers. Very, very grateful to them.
Thank you all, and thank you, Felicity, for chairing this thing too.
Thanks, Felicity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Meeting.
Thank you again to everyone for coming. We can't stop the bombs dropping, but we can at least organise the opposition. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Francis. And I am going to close the meeting at this point and stop the recording.